We have a lot of customers who ask us, hey, what's the deal with Sable? Do they kill the animals?
In this video, Jason was kind enough to chat to me about a range of topics, ranging from his own love of the hobby.
You know, you really do have, for the first time, I think, something for everyone. I don't care what you're into, you can find it in miniature, and you can paint it and have a good time doing it.
Through to brush manufacture.
But we were going to be able to deliver what we believe is the best synthetic brush on the planet.
So stay tuned, because this is a bit different to my normal videos, but really interesting nonetheless. It's a long one, so strap in, but if you want to skip forward, I'll divide the video into chapters so you can do that too. Thank you to everyone on the channel who's subscribed so far. It really means a lot to me, but without further ado, let's get into it. First off, right out of the gate, I just want to say thank you to talking to me.
Oh no, we love that any way we can.
So let's start with some introduction. My name is James from Rising 8 Minis, and you are of course, Jason.
That's me.
So you started out as Slow Fuse Gaming, but you also have a YouTube channel, is that right?
Yeah, it all started with the Twitch channel, basically, and then people force us to put stuff on YouTube. I'm horrible at pre-recorded stuff. We're all built for live, so we kind of do better in the Twitch realm, at least keeping up with it. Everything on the YouTube channel is generally, well, let's take this live video and put it on YouTube so people stop yelling at us. But we don't. I'm really bad at making pre-recorded content.
Yeah, I'm not much better.
You're already doing better than pre-recorded content just by having this happening. So you're winning.
Okay, so as a bit of a warm-up, I wanted to ask some really tough questions. Number one, what's your favourite paint?
Oh gosh, on the spot, right out of the gates. So am I allowed to have 63 favorite colors? Because that's how many paints are in our line.
No, that's cheating. But I'll be nice and you can have 3 colours.
I can have 3 colors. Well, I'm not so erudite to say that I just want to paint CMYK. I'm going to go hard in the paint. I'm going to be like, I want jade, I want mahogany, and I want titanium white. There. I can't make anything worth painting out of those 3 colors for the rest of my life, but I'll be okay with it. I'll figure it out.
Ooh, nice choices. Yeah, I love your jade colour too. So what sort of things do you like to paint? Assuming you like to paint in your free time, of course.
Oh yeah, all the time. You know, again, that's a tough one, right? Having been in the hobby for so long, I think that I'm a very rule of cool guy, and it's funny what week to week, day to day, month to month jumps out at me and is cool. But I think that it would be just, oh boy, that's a tough one, right? Because I can't even say like sci-fi models, because sometimes I'm like, oh, this fantasy model is freaking awesome. So I don't know. I really am just yeah. I literally will for my personal, like, you know what, the world be damned, I'm gonna paint today. I will go on, lately with all the 3D printing that we do, I'll go dig through STLs on various sites and, you know, buy an STL for $5 that I think is cool, print it out and throw paint at it for a while. Sometimes it's just like, I want to paint skin today, so I'll go look for a model that really grabs me, that has a lot of skin and textures. Sometimes it's like, I want to paint some beefy gun-toting badass, and I'll go look for that or grab it off of my bench. And you know, right now, it as silly as it seems, it's trying to get armies done. So I don't know. It's always, I'm all over the place like most hobbyists. You know, there's not any one thing that I focus on. Yeah, right now I'm painting Adeptus Titanicus and loving it. So I'm painting little Titans. That's what I do. I could be doing that forever.
Yeah, cool. You know, I've never actually painted one. I'd love to try, but yeah, I never got around to it. What do you get up to outside the hobby, you know, for downtime?
What is this downtime you speak of? I don't understand. Yeah, I don't understand the question. You know, it's funny when you're in this industry and you love this industry as a passion, and I think that I try hard to keep it a passion for me rather than it becoming a slog and work. And so I do a lot of, you know, we have a game night here at our factory where locals can come in and play games and hobby with us. You know, so there is a lot of things that I do in downtime that is still directly related to the hobby. Jen and I, my partner and I, run the company together, and so, you know, we're so embedded in this business 24 hours a day that sometimes we'll be sitting around the house, and I guess our downtime is TV's on, neither one of us are really paying attention to it. We're rubbing the dog's belly, you know, so goof around with the dog and just zoning out, I think is probably. Every now and then we try to go out to dinner. There's that, but yeah, we don't have hobbies outside of the hobby, really.
It's really good to see people who clearly love it so much. Sometimes, I guess, when you're in an industry, you can sort of fall out of love with it or just lose that little bit of passion. Good to see that you haven't.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing, that's a lot of work in and of itself, right? That could be a whole episode of conversation just talking about how to not let your passions, you know, become what you hate if you do them as a business, for sure.
Last of the hard-hitting questions. Licking brushes, yes or no?
No, definitely not. Not even slightly on that one. Don't lick the brush. Don't eat the paint. Don't lick the brush. Nope. No.
So sorry for the slightly stupid questions. It's just break the ice and make it a little bit easier for me. I've never done an interview like this before, so it's a new one for me too. I guess I wanted to start by sort of getting your view and your story for what your background is. You know, how did it all start out for you? What's your journey? So yeah, do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So yeah, it did start out as Slow Fuse Gaming. I had been streaming video games for years, and it was fun until it wasn't. And you know, it had become a revenue stream for me, doing it with Twitch. I had started with Justin TV way back, and then doing the live show. We had a big following, and we were generating some revenue from our crowd and growing, and everything was good. And then the games I was playing started to really grind on me, and I found out, you know, late in life. I'm 51 now, so this would have been 44, 45 time frame in my life, that I was like, you know what, I really don't like video games anymore. After playing them since, you know, I can remember, I was like, I just am not having fun. The world of video games was changing to a point where I wasn't enjoying it, and so I told myself I'd give streaming 6 more months, and if I wasn't liking it, if I couldn't find some way to like and enjoy broadcasting anymore, that I would go to something else. At the time, I was selling my metal shop. I built custom motorcycles and stuff like that. So I had a lot going on in the creative space, working with bronze and metals and jewelry and things like that. So I had a lot of opportunities. I was kind of in a phase in my life, you know, we've all been there, where you're kind of like, you know, I don't know what I want to do right now. You know, like I said, I'm in my 50s now, and I still don't know what I want to do when I grow up. And so that was one of those times, and it was, I went off, my mom had dual knee reconstruction surgery, and so I was able to take some time off, go up and stay with her and help her during her initial rehabilitation, driving around, doing all the stuff around the house. And during that time, I busted out some miniatures and was painting in my downtime, because she lives up in the mountains in Colorado, and so there's not a whole lot to go do at that time of the year that it was. And so I started painting, and I was like,
You're in Arizona now?
I'm in Arizona. Yeah. We're in Arizona and Phoenix. And I have family in Colorado and Texas. But so I was up there, I was painting, building some miniatures. I think it was Infinity Miniatures or something like that. I was at the time very interested in getting into Infinity. I moved down to Arizona, where there's a very large Infinity gaming crowd here. And so I was getting interested in that, and got, you know, took some models and primer and all that stuff, and was doing as good a job of painting at my mom's house as I could. And at the time, it just kind of struck me, as I was playing my video games and trying to stream with bad internet at my mom's house, and I was like, I wonder if people would watch paint dry and think that was cool. And so I started, and it never struck me, you know, this hobby that I've toted around with me since I was 10 years old. I was like, oh, what if we did this? And so I looked around, and there were like a handful. There was probably 4, 5, 6, maybe half a dozen people that were streaming painting in limited capacity. And there was a crowd, not a big crowd, but there were people that were engaged and having fun watching. And so I was like, oh, I should do a day a week or so doing that. So when I got done at my mom's and came back down to Arizona, I started that. And that turned into Slow Fuse Gaming, where we went, and we started painting, and it became an all-day, everyday thing. And we were generating revenue that way on the stream. It kept me infused and energetic about live broadcasts. And then it just took off, right? We were basically teaching painting, and to some extent, I've been a trainer, teacher, you know, of things throughout my entire life. And so it just came naturally to tell people, hey, here's what I'm doing. Here's what works for me. And we were using various other products. And then we started, I think the first thing we made was our own brushes and our own brush cleaner. And then after doing that for a while, we made the whole paint story is a totally launch on its own, because we started making some other things. We made the what we call our hobby go bag, which is a way to tote around all your hobby products when you travel. I'm a guy who, as an inventor in my past life in electronics, it was always about what I wanted and what I thought was missing in my electronics in that case, but in this case, the hobby. As I'm sitting at my bench painting, what is it that I really wish I had? And if that's feasible to make and you can make it at good quality, why don't we try that and see if people like it? And so that's how this whole business started was, hey, what do I need? I need a better white hobby paint because they all suck. And so I made one and used it on stream, and everybody on stream was like, oh my God, I need that paint. And so we started hand bottling it here in Arizona, literally Jen and I hand mixing it and pouring it out of plastic cups into empty bottles, and handwriting SFG with a little red heart on it and shipping it out and calling it special white. And we sold so much we couldn't keep up. We couldn't literally in our house make enough special white to keep demand satisfied. And so that was when the gears started turning of, could we make this a bigger thing? We were making brushes. We had developed some really good partnerships through brush manufacturing in Germany, just basically on a whim, just personalities made sense and gelled. We had no right to be dealing with the people we were dealing with because we were so small. And we were like, well, the proverbial poop or get off the pot, to keep it somewhat eloquent, that we either do this as a real business or we find something else to do. And so we did. And that's where, the Monument brand started coming in, because Slow Fuse Gaming having been a name that kind of preceded into video game world for me, it was like, well, that doesn't really say what we want to say about the products we're making. It didn't sound, I don't want to say it didn't sound luxury enough, because we weren't trying to be high-end luxury name, but we just needed something that was a little bit more ambiguous so that we could do whatever we wanted to do. Yeah, something that when people saw it, they didn't have to know who we were already to understand and identify with the products.
The whole point of this, I really wanted to talk to you about brushes. It's something I see come up a lot on the forums, places that I follow, and I guess I really wanted to talk to someone who knows really what they're talking about. So I think probably the best place to start with this is for me to lean in on your experience. So when you're explaining to people about which brush to choose, what do you say?
The biggest part of that is the difference between synthetic and Sable, right? You can get into nuances inside of natural hair brushes and synthetic brushes, because there's lots of what we'll just call as generic filament and all of that. Filament's not really a good word for natural, but we'll use it anyway. And so the language has changed over the past decade a lot, to where now it really comes down to how do you as a painter paint? What is what I call hand pressure, right? So what type of pressure do you apply when you paint? And on stream, I'll show it by how much does your brush bend when you're doing your general brush stroke. Not like dry brushing or slapping base coats on where you're not really caring about it, you're just putting paint on. But when you're doing what you'll call just your standard layering, how far does your brush bend over? And if you get people to think about that and actually pay attention to it, because none of us do, you don't think that way. But when you look at it, if your brush is bending a lot, then Sable is going to be better for you because it's a softer bristle in most cases. And so it's going to retain its point through more pressure. That's just physics. There is some science behind the shape of the brush and how well it retains its point under pressure. But in general, natural Sable is going to do better because of its flexibility. Synthetic, because it's generally plastic of various sorts, nylons, polyester, and mixes and blends, is going to be a little bit stiffer. It's going to have a little bit more snap, and under pressure might tend to square the tip out a little more. And by square, I mean flatten it out, be more like a cat tongue, instead of a true point. That even becomes a hard discussion to have, because as science gets better and better, as with our Pro Synthetic line, I like our Pro Synthetics better than I like Sables now. We've worked really hard over the last 5 years to come up with a synthetic that really matches all of the expectations. And of course, things like tip curl come into play because of the memory of plastics. But with modern technology, synthetic has gotten to the point where you can say, hey, you really just need to pick the brush that's the right size and shape for what you're trying to do. And a good quality synthetic and a good quality Sable will do virtually the exact same job. There are nuances, and of course, every tool is subjective, right? As an artist, one of the biggest things you'll hear is people will be like, well, I don't believe that at all. I've been using this for 30 years and I'll never change. And that's fine. One of our biggest things is we will never tell you the tool you need for the job specifically. We'll tell you to try these tools for that job, and then whichever one gets the job done to your liking is the correct tool. So, and I know that's a bad answer when you want to a lot of people are like, I just want to be told what to do. And I'm like, well, I would say try these and see what you like. And most people have gotten used to that and will come out. You know, some people will use both. Some people come out on one side of the fence or the other. It's very interesting for us as a manufacturer to look at the public's response to the difference between synthetic and Sable over the years, and how synthetic is now making more and more inroads, and people are warming up to it, you know, and they're, you know, you're still not talking about the $5 for 10 brushes at Walmart thing, you know, the cheap Chinese synthetics, because they're still garbage. But if you spend money on a good synthetic, you're going to get a really good brush.
I think that's something as a content creator you feel quite acutely. I think everyone would like a neatly packaged answer, sort of like a how-to. The world isn't that black and white, right? And sometimes it just comes down to what's best for you at that given time. I guess I had an idea that when I first started using slightly better brushes, that synthetics were okay, but they were just cheap disposable things, and to be a really top draw painter you had to use Sables. As you grow and get more experience, you sort of learn that everything's a little bit less black and white and a little bit more shades of grey. What are your thoughts on that, and do you buy into that?
I think because you're talking about, so when Sable, the real difficulty here is that Sable is a very narrow band of product offering. So when we're talking about Red Sable or Kolinsky Sable, though, you know, and Kolinsky is kind of a faux pas, that doesn't really exist as a thing anymore, right? The region Kolinsk is where the Sable comes from, but we're not really using, it's weasel hair, right? So as you're looking at that, you either have the stuff by the base of the tail or you have the stuff from the rest of the body, and that's, you get your range of bristles that way. And so there's a very narrow band of difference in that realm of Sable, okay? There are blends where you can have a Sable that's mixed with some synthetic that keeps it, you know, a little bit more stable over time. Things that you can do that way, but of course then you get tip curl because it has some synthetic in it. So, but all in all, it's a very, when I say narrow band, it's like only one or two choices, right? You get Sable, and you hope that they picked good hair and that the hair stays together on the brush and doesn't frizz out like, you know, bad hair day. And that's Sable. Synthetic, on the other hand, is such a broad range, right? You've got like nylon, just like pure 100% nylon on one end that is I hate saying for all intent and purpose is really bad, but for what we do, it is very disposable. It is very low quality, very disposable. But then, of course, it should be low cost. And so you can find them that are expensive because they've been, you know, up branded and whatever. But you have such a broad range of offering when you say synthetic. And I think what happens is that most people get in their head that synthetic is as narrow of a band of product as Sable is. Because Sable's either this company has good ones and this company I've had problems with, and, you know, XYZ company has turned to shite lately or whatever it is. And in reality, synthetic can be the $5 for 10 at Walmart is not the same as, say, our Pro Synthetics. They are totally different filaments. They have a totally different cost factor. The filament that we use in our synthetics is equally as expensive to Sable hair in most cases. And so as a manufacturer, you're looking at ways to deal with that, in that, well, I can't charge as much for this brush as I do for Sable because the world doesn't believe that that quality is there. Now, it's a lot different when you go into the what we'll call the classical art world, where a lot of people who paint with oils or who paint with other mediums on other canvas and other things, synthetic is some of the highest quality stuff that they buy, and they really don't have a whole lot of Sable. Number one, because Sable at the size of brush you might need costs an absolute fortune. Right? You're talking $100+ brushes when you get up above a size 10, you know, round. There's an exponential growth in the amount of hair in a bundle from one size to the next. When you go from a size 4 to a size 6, you almost double the amount of hair. And you don't think of it that way because it's only 2 numbers bigger. You know, this one goes to 11, you know, but 11 costs 8 times as much because it has that much more on it. So that, I think that's the biggest discrepancy, is that some people tend to just lump it all together and say synthetics are cheap, disposable, Sables are where you want to be for quality work. And there's such a range of synthetic that you could have cheap disposable ones for just laying base coats or dry brushing or basing, you know, your textures on your models. And then you could have very expensive ones at the upper end that you're only picking up to dot eyes or to do that texture that you need to for a particular blend. And they can handle all of those jobs. And so that's what we've been trying to train people to understand on the stream. And more people get it every day. You know, more and more people see. Jen and I have been using the same set of pro synthetics that we've been using since we started sampling the hairs and we're ready for prime time. We were going into production with them earlier this year, and we've been using the same test sets on stream for months and months and months with zero tip curl, and have done every technique imaginable with them, beat the absolute crap out of them. I haven't washed mine at all. I typically, when I see how a brush is going to handle for manufacturing, I don't treat it well. Short of running it over with my car, I just don't care. I want to see how it rolls up, because, you know, the normal painter, I don't want to have to rely on the normal painter treating their brushes well. I want to be able to give them a brush that is going to handle what they, you know, the abuse they give to it. There's no silver bullet. There's no way to guarantee that, you know, some ham-fisted painter who dips their paint in mud and never washes the paint off of it, you know, is going to enjoy that. They're always going to want $5 Walmart brushes, you know, so there is that aspect to it too. Some people just are better suited, and I have no problem telling them that. Like, you're never going to get the mileage out of an expensive brush because of the way you paint, but your painting is great, so who cares? Just go buy cheap brushes.
Can I just ask a little bit about how brushes are actually made? I was in the actual process of how brushes are made. Like, I really geek out on this stuff, so I thought it would be really interesting.
Well, it's the exact same process as far as the brush shaping and such. It's just how the filament is created, right? The filament is spooled off, as you can imagine. The easiest way that I tell it to people is that you have these synthetic spiders that are just spooling out silk all the time, right? It's not. They're pulling it through extruders, and so you're getting these filaments at various diameters. An extruder is just how you take the molten version of the product and you wind up cooling it and pulling it through, and you get wire, basically. And so you now have these filaments that are then cut to length based on the product that you're trying to make. A lot of our filaments are things that, you know, we find through, believe it or not, like the outdoor fabrics world. You might find an amazing filament that's been made to be light, durable, for strapping on backpacks. And it's some new invention made usually in Japan, and you're like, ooh, wonder what that would do as a brush, you know? And so you throw it against the wall and see. And so it's kind of weird in that way, but other than that, it's exactly the same as natural hair or anything else. Yeah. As far as what happens once you get a bundle of raw material, you know, the factories in Germany just get bundles of raw material and links that they will then cut and shape to fit the various size brushes that they're trying to make. And whether it's synthetic or Sable, it's all the same process. Well, I say the same process. Obviously the quality control and the measuring is different for the way you look at a Sable, because there's a lot of inconsistencies in Sable that don't exist necessarily in synthetic. Synthetic, you might get a kinked hair through some packaging irregularity, but you're not going to get, you know, older versus newer hair that came from a pelt, right? You're not going to get gray hair. Yeah, like my gray hair that wants to go off in 50 million directions is not really a thing that happens with synthetic, unless it like, yeah, eyebrow that pokes off, or the nose hair that curls in and tickles your brain. Yeah, there's really none of that with synthetic, right? But with Sable, you have to look at it a little bit differently.
So you have the brushes made overseas, then the finished brushes are shipped back to you. Is that right?
Yep. Yeah, everything comes here to get packaged and quality checked. We do all of that here. But handle and ferrule assembly is done in Germany. Of course, brush shaping by master brush makers there. And so then we get them here. Everything goes through rigorous quality check here. Every single brush gets checked, and then they get packaged, labeled, and shipped out from here to the world. Yeah. Well, you can see the quality differences, right? And it's weird coming from a manufacturing background when you know, the world is so used to handmade being such a great thing, and with brushes it still is. It's very artisanal in the manufacturing and the way it is what we would call semi-automated. There's now tooling where the crimp on the ferrule is not done by hand anymore. You don't have to line up by hand and have somebody holding it steadily and crimp the ferrule like it used to be. You know, now there are tool and die manufacturers that make automated machines that are hydraulic, that, you know, you stick the handle in and it crimps the ferrule. And so it is a more automated process, but there's still a person doing it. And then, you know, you CNC machines making handles as opposed to somebody on a lathe. So there is an automated process behind the scenes, but the assembly and the quality checks at each stage are still very much that old world, you know, master brush maker. And it's funny because the master brush makers don't make a lot of brushes. They train the journeyman brush makers underneath them in that old world style, right? It's very much like a blacksmith training a journeyman, that journeyman eventually getting his title to become a blacksmith. And so I love that aspect of it. Right? We'd love to think about it that way. It's not quite like that, but yeah. And so that's still fun and keeps it very kind of, it's just a neat process. You know, it's much easier. It's much better for me than my world of electronics, where everything was just machines stamping out PCBs, and then, you know, a line of people placing them in a case and screwing the screw and putting it down the line. It feels a lot better than that. Now, there are a whole bunch of brushes from that end of the world in the Pacific Rim, like Asia, that are done on like a more automated process without the master brush maker involved. And you see that in the quality. You know, there's just a total difference in what's happening out of certain brush houses than others, and that's why we choose to still do everything in Europe.
I'm actually quite surprised that it's that labor intensive. I love the romantic notion that it's made by an old paintbrush master sat in a darkened room just making paintbrushes all day long.
I think that's the best word, is that romanticism, right? Is that we still like to dream that everything was done where people loved what they did and loved the product they produce, and so we do, and so that's how we, if at all possible, we like to form relationships with people that do that too. So, and yeah, the people over in Germany are great because their family has been doing this for over 150 years. So it's amazing.
So this is a bit of a controversial topic, so I just wanted to ask it straight up. There's loads of misinformation out there about how Sable's collected, what happens to the animals, if it's even ethical at all. And I've really struggled to find information about it when I've been researching the videos. So what are your thoughts on the ethics of this? I mean, are there any red flags I need to look out for? Is there something I should be aware of if I'm purchasing Sable brushes? Is there anything advice you'd give to people that would help them buy more responsibly? Or is this something we don't need to worry about?
So it's a good question. It's very odd. Like we have a lot of customers who ask us, hey, what's the deal with Sable? Do they kill the animals? And there still are a couple of firms that are no kill, but that's to my knowledge, right? And there's limited visibility there unless you're directly in that part of the industry. To my knowledge, that is less and less the case. The animal is used for other things and farmed for other things, and paintbrushes are not the main part of that industry. So the one thing you have to, and this extends to every animal brush, right? There are very few that only the hair of that animal is useful, right? What we're usually getting is a downstream byproduct of using the most of each animal kill as possible for everything, right? Like, so 100% use, no waste is kind of the thing. And so if you're not averse to animal trapping and things like that, then I feel like the brush industry and where the hairs come from is a very good end of that, because it is guaranteeing the full use of the animal. And like I said, this is not true of all animals, but in general. But yeah, one of the biggest problems, just being frank, is that the demand for hobby style brushes has increased so dramatically over the past decade. And anytime that happens, you get manufacturers like in China who start doing such bulk manufacturing of product that product now has eroded the entire quality line of doing Sables, let's say, because so much of that hair can be sold at good prices to China specifically and manufacturers in the East, that the people at the front end of collecting the hair and bundling the hair and selling the hair don't have to worry so much about quality. My 2 cents on it is that if you can make a quick buck selling to one outlet without all of the ramifications of CITES documents, there's a document called a CITES document that has to trace the hair back from its specific origins to make sure it's not being overly killed if it's an endangered or a protected species, things like that. So they have to be able to trace it from its origins. Well, in the East, that's a little more lax, right? And so if you don't have to go through all the hassle and you can sell to all these big manufacturers and you can constantly get the money that you need to survive as a business person, then why wouldn't you do that rather than dealing with this old world romanticized version of it where quality is a huge thing and they ask a lot more questions and they want better quality and they make you work harder. And some people may see this video and yell at me for this, but I have firsthand knowledge that this is kind of the biggest problem right now. That's why you're seeing big manufacturers have problems in their Sables. We have to go through every brush, and honestly, sometimes we see a tremendous amount of fall off just in the quality of the sable that's just unavoidable. And so long term, I think that sable is, I don't want to say it's a dying thing, but I think it's going to be harder and harder to maintain its kind of lofty status because of the fact that, let's just say you're trapping these animals, and if you over trap the animals because the demand is so great, then the animals become severely stressed, right? We know this just from other forms of industries where animals are the core product, right? Whether you're killing them or not, if you're dairy cows and if you have them in stressful situations, the quality and quantity of milk goes down, right? Even though you're not slaughtering that animal. And so same thing here, if you're over trapping weasels, then the weasel population is severely stressed. That does everything from causing the reproductive nature of weasels to go down to the quality. I mean, imagine what happens to you when you're stressed out. Does your hair fall out? Right? Quite possibly. Yeah, quite possibly, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But we know for a fact that that stress causes all sorts of weird physiological effects, and some of those include then up to your hair falling out. Pull out clumps of hair. We see it in the movies all the time, and so you have to assume that same what do we call it? Depletion of quality, reduction of quality happens in the wild. And so that's what we're very concerned with, is that we, on both sides, right? That seems atrocious to me. On the one hand, it's like, I would hate to feel like what we're doing is profiting from this horrible nature of over trapping, when trapping can be done in a way that it's, catch and release, and it's done consistently, and the animals are allowed to go back into the wild and do their thing, and the population of animals isn't stressed, then I would have no problem with that at all. As it is, it causes us both a conundrum on the treatment of animals and a conundrum on the business side, because the business side is obviously we pay for every hair we get, and if all 50% of the hairs we get are horrible because the animals are over trapped, then that does nobody any good, right? That drives the cost of the product up, and again, you can kind of see, without really having it have to be said, that we love synthetic brushes. It's just the truth.
I use decent quality sable brushes. As we said before, it's about doing what's right for you at any given moment. But I also don't want to say you should do this or you should do that. That's absolutely not what I'm about. But I am aware that I am having an impact, and if it is possible, I want to try and lessen it.
It's a struggle, right? It is. It's a personal struggle just for me, because I've never really been one that is, like, I'm not like, oh boy, you get into such a political discussion on these fronts, right? Because it's not like I'm a card-carrying member of People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, but I am a human being that understands that there is a conscientious way to not impact the environment to get what you need. And so, if you look at like the Native Americans here, the indigenous peoples had a much more responsible relationship. Yes, you hunted and yes, you killed, but you understood that if you hunted and killed too much for glory and sport, that you were reducing populations, and it prevented you from hunting and killing next year for food. And you followed the animals and shared the land and things like that. And so I have a very romantic view of, I wish that could be the way it always was. And so you do struggle when you're like, oh God, we're factory farming weasels for these brushes so that we can make a buck. And the weasels are turning out horrible quality, and it's not for any other reason than they're over-trapped. And you have not followed that, hey, supply demand be damned, you can only provide this much hair and make sure it's good hair. Because if that was the reason why the price was going up, then the whole industry can understand, hey, sable's gone up because we can't produce enough sable, to do this. And we can't trap more animals because then the sable quality goes bonk, and you wind up paying $30 for the brush. It's not good.
So literally, it's a supply and demand thing.
Right. And what's happening right now is that they're finding ways to introduce more animals into the process. Those more animals are delivering less quality. You're matching demand with that low quality, but still driving the price up because you're having to do more work. And so that's where the systems start to break down, in my opinion. And somebody might rifle back because, this is not just a single supply chain solution. There are some that are much better, some that are much worse. And that's where, as a manufacturer, we have to try to navigate with the factory and find out what does work and what doesn't.
So again, that's an interesting point. It sounds like you're saying that the sable industry can't be sustained at this rate of growth, but the synthetics are going to be the future of the industry. I guess there's always going to be a place for Sable, but synthetics are going to be the mainstream.
Well, and the reality is, I think that a lot of people, if you're out there listening to this, that a lot of the conclusion is that synthetic is the future. And that's not just because of the Sable conversation, but because synthetic will surpass Sable in its quality for doing the job that we do with Sables. And it will be like analog versus digital. There will be people who hold on to the analog version because they have this romantic view of what it sounds like and all that. I was one of them. I was a very analog music guy. And when digital came out, I didn't like it. And this is analog versus digital in paintbrushes. And the digital world, some people don't like, and they have their gripes about it, and that's fine. But I think as they use it, and as they're honest with themselves, and they try new things and try better quality and see where science has led, and you know what the difference is, they'll find that, oh, you know, where has this? It's almost to the point where it's like, where has this been all my life? I mean, we really are getting there. And it's nice to be embedded in that and to see it happen, because I was like everybody else. I was like, I don't use synthetic brushes except to put white glue on my terrain. That was all they were worth. And as recently as like a decade ago, you know, the late 90s, early 2000s, that was the story. Well, we've come a long way in a short time.
For the last part of this interview, so I wanted to pick your brain about brushes and ask questions that I see people asking all the time. I guess the number one question is how long my brushes should last. I wonder this all the time. Am I doing it wrong? Am I doing something right? Years? Should I be disposing of them every 15 minutes? What do you think?
Oh yeah, and that's one of the hardest things to get people to understand, is that it is a consumable. It is a disposable product, and you have to go into it understanding that and purchase correctly based on how that affects your livelihood as you go forth. If you're a commission painter painting thousands and thousands of models, and every model returns a profit for you, then you can afford to maybe look at a higher quality brush that does a higher quality job on each of those models, even though you throw them away quicker than everybody else. That's one of the only worlds where you can go and talk to a true commission painter and say, what brushes you use? And be like, oh, I don't have a problem spending, you know, $10, $15 for a brush and throwing it away every 30 days. And I buy them by the dozen, you know, because they have a profit center based on the work that brush does. For you and me and people, you know, that are just painting for fun, that's a different equation, right? Because it's like, you may want that brush to last forever. And so no brush lasts forever. I do have brushes, I will admit, I have brushes in my stash that I've had for over 20 years. And they're great brushes, but I've gone and bought the same brush and it hasn't lasted 20 years. So you can get an aberration that's amazing, right? You know, and then you can have brushes that don't last at all. So it's a weird world, but as soon as you understand that they are meant to be disposable, like even as manufacturers, we understand that they will get used up. They will. I even teach on stream how to take a brush that has outlived its usefulness. Maybe a Sable that you've had for a couple of years has started shedding enough to where it's reduced its size down to the point where it's not usable for what we were using it for, but you can cut it down and make it a stippling brush. You know, you can cut a synthetic and turn it into a dry brush. You can trim them down. You can shape them to do specific crazy, like I cut one and trimmed a synthetic #2 of ours down to make it a P-dot camo brush, to where it just had a round flat tip. So you could dip it in the paint and dip it and get a dot and dip it. And you can do polka dots with it. So it's a polka dot brush. And people saw that and were like, oh my God, I've been throwing my brushes away. And I'm like, don't throw your brushes away. It gets to the end of its life. There's two things you can do with a brush at the end of its life. You can make it, and one of them is very short use, because you can use it to put super glue on your bases to do terrain stuff. And then of course, throw it away. Yeah, that's a one-time thing. Or you can use it as the brush that I mix my paint in my airbrush cup with. And when you get relegated to the mixing the paint in the airbrush cup, you know you're done. But you can still live. You know? Again, it's that funny story we tell, because my poor brush that I use for mixing in the airbrush is just some random, you know, Hobby Lobby brush. And you know, I've been doing it on stream for years. And I think in 6 or 7 years, we've gone through 2 brushes that mix in the airbrush. So they actually probably have a longer lifespan at that part of their job than they ever did in the regular painting part. So brushes are useful forever.
Two, one of the criticisms I have had in the past is getting paint into the ferrule of my brush. I guess my take on it is brushes are tools. Damage is going to happen. They're going to be disposable. But I don't know. Am I wrong in that? Is there something I should be doing? Is there something? What do you think?
Yeah, paint your ferrule. Yeah, it's sometimes it's funny, you know, that I have to make a note on the stream that, hey, I'm intentionally not washing these brushes to see how long they'll still hold a tip. and still do what I want them to do, even when they're crammed and clogged. And of course, when you paint, the thinner you paint, the more intrusion of paint into the ferrule that you're going to have. And a lot of us as miniature painters glaze, filter, use thin. I mean, our paints are already thin. So the struggle that we have using liquid acrylics is that it is already in the world of art a very thin paint. Even the thickest liquid acrylics are considered thin paints. They are lower viscosity than tube acrylics, tube oils, gouache, things like that. So, we're sucking a lot of paint up into the ferrule every time we paint. And so, yeah, cleaning that is a very, very important part of extending the life of your brush. Now, and that is one of the big pitfalls for people, going back to that previous, it is a disposable product, is that some people won't clean and maintain their brush, and they'll spend $20 or $15 or even $10 on a brush and feel like they didn't get their value out of it, and then hammer that manufacturer on social media. And it's like, if you could, in a perfect world, you could go and sit with them and say, hey, did you maintain that brush properly? Because every time I hear somebody that said, hey, I got a brush, there are some problems you can have with a brush that would make it instantaneously unusable, right? And so we're sympathetic that of course we replace all of our brushes that are like that to customers. But beyond that, it comes down to a maintenance responsibility, because that paint in the ferrule will cause the tip to split, period. And we show that on stream all the time. And that's why we make our brush goop. So Jen, my partner, hand makes every 10 of brush goop here, and we've concocted a formula that is pure magic. Like it's a conditioner, a reshaper, and a cleaner. And it's without any harsh astringents. It will clean everything and suck it out of the ferrule, and then you can put it on at the end of your session to hold the shape, which even works for synthetics. So if you're afraid of getting tip curl, if you repoint it and leave it every night or every session, I should say, not every night, then you can extend the life of even a synthetic. But cleaning at its base is very important. And so I'm kind of a hypocrite, because I don't clean a lot of my brushes, but I'm also doing that stress test constantly on my end as a manufacturer.
So do as I say, not as I do, right?
Yeah, Jen is much better. Jen cleans her brushes. Jen shows, cleaning the brushes and maintains her brushes a lot better than I do, because she's not really stress testing, as much as I am. And me on the other end, yeah, it's funny you say that, because I'm always like, do as I say, don't do as I do. I'm beating the absolute crap out of this brush is a very common phrase I use on stream.
So the last thing is, I guess, is there anything that stands out as a particular bugbear for you?
Well, I mean, lately in the U.S., there's been a problem where everybody thinks that Sable can't be imported. And so that's caused a little bit of stress in the industry, I know. And it's not that Sable can't be imported, it's that you have to have a license to import Sable. And so Sable can be imported by manufacturers, but not by individuals, right? Because you can't get a license as an individual. Yeah, you've got to have site certification, you got to have Fish and Wildlife, so you've got to be registered. And so that can become a problem, I guess, because of like Brexit and some of the issues going on over in Europe and the UK. I know that customs has started really fine-tooth combing products coming in and out, because now charges between government and customs agencies have changed. And so usually we see when big political issues are overarching, that customs will nail down and start looking at things they didn't used to look at. And so from my broker and agents, they've told us that, yeah, individual packages coming over that are not, that include things that are recognized by Fish and Wildlife, possible endangered species products, they're starting to hammer down on that. So I know that there were some people that were having problems as a consumer buying a brush from overseas. Their small package would show up and get burned in customs, and it wouldn't even necessarily get returned. It would get marked as, because the people in Europe are doing the right thing and marking it with the tariff code it needs. It shows up here, customs flags it and throws it in the garbage, or it never reaches the end user. So that's rare that we see that happen at the consumer level, because generally it has a cost associated. If you're not bringing in more than X amount of dollars, you're not on the radar. But every now and then there's a fluke in the system. So, of course we see, oh my God, you can't import Sable into the US. And that's not correct. But it does make it harder as a consumer, which good for us, because we make brushes here and you get US brushes, So, but I guess from just a standard usage thing, it goes back to that synthetic is garbage. That's one that always kind of irks me. It's like, try better synthetics and see. But I'm not trying to say don't use Sables either. You know, it's like use the brush that makes sense for you. Like I said in the beginning, whatever tool gets the job done to your satisfaction is the correct tool. Yeah. We preach confidence. We want you to be confident in your hobby. So you'll see when you see me around social media typing in, I'm very nebulous. You know, I don't pin down and argue point specifics because sometimes they're not really arguable. You're not going to find a solution. Somebody saying that, you know, hey, you know, this product's garbage, this product's great, and my experience, my anecdotal evidence is completely the opposite. You know, that's not a conversation worth having because it can be true. Both things can be true. But yeah, I don't know. I don't really, from a brush perspective, I think that, you know, it's the clean your brush, don't clean your brush. Everything we've talked about here has the ability to spike that, you know, because it is such a subjective world. Our entire hobby is subjective, right? Whether you like X model or you like X paint or you like X brush or you like X company, you know, it really is really, and I think that's what's so great about our nerd religion here is that you have something for everyone. You know, you really do have, for the first time, I think, something for everyone. I don't care what you're into, you can find it in miniature and you can paint it and have a good time doing it. And so that's really our focus, is leading people towards whatever they're going to find that's going to get them jazzed about it. Because if this industry continues to grow, then, you know, we all have an opportunity to do well. I'm not going to be one of the ones that says we all do well, but we all have the opportunity to do so.
So I guess if people have watched the video for this long, they're going to want to know how to find you. How do people find you?
Oh, we're just Monument Hobbies. Just Google it. Monument Hobbies, right? You know, you can find it everywhere.
Well, listen, Jason, thank you so much. You've absolutely blown me away. You're a really top guy. Thank you so much. You've been amazing. It's been great.
Well, I think it's awesome, and it led me to this, and so we get to talk, and we've made new friends, and that's always a great thing. So,
Monument Hobbies, great paints, great brushes, great people. Thank you so much.
Yep. Thanks. Have a great day.
All that's really left to say is that humans need fantasy to be the place where the falling angel meets the rising ape. Thank you very much.